Alright, so I want to make a video updating everyone. Getting right into it. Alberta had 47 new cases yesterday, so we are up a little bit, but there's some things to point out. Number one, hospitalizations are still going down. A week ago we were at like 50 some, 55 roughly, so we're down to 42. That's a good sign. The other thing to point out that I pointed out before is that yesterday I believe we were around 302, 303,000 tests. We're up to 310, so we're testing more people than ever. We opened up testing to anybody that wants to get a test. So when you do that, you're going to discover more cases. Not only that, my guess is that most of the new cases that we're discovering are people that are asymptomatic, which are very unlikely to spread it in the first place. So that's something to point out, that we have a bunch of people freaking out about, oh, we have an uptick in cases. Why are we? No, the only reason we have an uptick is because we're testing more people. It has very little to do with the protests or any of this kind of stuff. And the protests again, we're about to. I think George Floyd was killed on like the 30th of May, roughly. So we're about 2 weeks, maybe not quite 2 weeks into this. Um, into there being mass protests, and I've yet to see any reports of a clear uptick in the states. Now, people are pointing out that Alberta and Canada, or Alberta or Canada, I don't think a lot of the other provinces have had major spikes in cases. I mean, Ontario had around, I mean, they had 203. That's about what they've been having for the last week or so. So yeah, the point being is that everybody's blaming this on the protests, and I don't think there's any evidence to back that up. It's a classic correlation causation fallacy. Now, am I 100% sure of that? No. But for the protests to be linked to an uptick in cases, we should have seen an uptick in cases in the States, because the protests and the riots happened on a much larger scale in the States. So it only makes sense that we would have seen it there, and they started quite a bit earlier there as well. So it only makes sense that we would have seen it already there as well. So it just doesn't make sense that the uptick in cases is clearly tied to the protests. It's a small degree of it, probably, but nothing significant. And I think it clearly shows that the fact that we had tens of thousands of people gathering in multiple Canadian cities, or sorry, multiple, I mean, Calgary, Edmonton, and probably hundreds in some other cities, and we still only had a small uptick in cases, like very small. It just goes to show that we can reopen and have no issues whatsoever. The only justification for locking things down is if the hospitals are going to be overwhelmed. And even then, I don't even think it's the case, because we can still flat out tell people who are at risk to stay home and whatnot. So, but that, like I said, that's the only reason that justifies a lockdown, or even to consider a lockdown, I would say. And that's not the case. Like and the reason I believe that it's not tied is that um, the hospitalizations have went down. Meanwhile, the active cases have gone up. I think it's very clear that since the government has allowed anybody who wants to go get a test, people who wouldn't have gotten a test before because they had no symptoms or very mild symptoms, because they couldn't go before, they didn't think it was worth it before, they went and they go now, and they're discovering a lot of asymptomatic people. They're discovering a lot of people who have very mild symptoms. So the other thing to bring up too is the prediction I made that it's going to go down as this being terrible. That it's, I mean, we know it's a complete and utter fraud. All the evidence that's came out since we started this shows that we shouldn't have even locked down in the first place, let alone still be locked down. All the numbers back that up. The death rate's much lower than we originally thought. Asymptomatic spread's much less than we originally thought. It stays on surfaces a lot shorter than we originally thought. Just all those kind of things. I mean, again, the New York case too is very telling, in that they found that 2/3 of people testing positive are people that were self-isolating, staying at home. And the point I'm trying to get at too is that when you point that out to the pro-lockdown crowd about how the virus, we vastly overestimated how bad it was, they'll always come at you with, oh, it's because of the lockdown that we weren't hit nearly as bad as we thought. And the point being is that I believe a lot of the models the numbers that they predicted were regardless of whether or not we were locked down. Um, and a lot of the numbers showed the numbers showed 2 million dead in the states, and there's no way you can possibly argue that the difference between locking down and not locking down is literally the difference between 25 times, right? There's no way you can possibly argue that. Maybe double, but there's no way you can possibly argue that. And I think that the numbers, if we would have closed the borders, closed down, shut down nursing homes, lock them down, suggested older people stay home, we could have kept the economy open and still had, I would say, I think we may even have had less dead, because closing the borders is what got us, and um, ignoring the nursing home things is the other thing that got us. So, not that we didn't lock down or not. So, the whole point being basically is that the lockdowns do not correlate with decreasing the spread, decreasing the deaths. That there's no correlation there whatsoever, because if there was, well, why are the majority of people testing positive in New York people that were stay home? Why is that the case? The only way the lockdowns make sense is if that's a very small number. That's the only way that makes sense. And the last thing to bring up here is um, to do with the other prediction I made that's clearly coming true as well, is that we are going to quote unquote be back to normal, but we aren't actually going to be back to normal. And that, Alberta just announced, we can go to phase 2 on, tomorrow. And most of the businesses that I've seen that are eligible to reopen aren't reopening. Both of the gyms that I've been to, none of them are reopening. A lot of other businesses not reopening, and the problem being is that people are deathly afraid of being sued, I believe, and a lot of them, the government's paying a lot of these people, or a lot of these business owners. So once the government funds dry up, which I would say, yeah, like starting July, government funds, you're not getting anything. But that's just me. So anyway, the problem being is that we need to um, give businesses immunity from stupid BS frivolous lawsuits for the simple, and I'll give you the situation. If a business, if someone tests positive, they end up in the hospital and they decide to sue whatever business that it's traced back to that they got it from, they need immunity, and they need immunity assuming that the person that they caught it from was asymptomatic or had very mild symptoms. If the business knows that someone there or someone that works there has it, and they still allow them to come to work or come to the business, then yeah, you should be able to be sued, because that's gross negligence. But if you if there's no way that you could have known, or the only way you would have known is to literally like question everybody, like you're questioning a murder suspect, at the police station, to find out whether or not they have it. If that's the only way you could have figured it out, that's frivolous. So I think there can be a very clear distinction in that if someone gets it and it traces back to someone who's asymptomatic or has very mild symptoms that the a reasonable person would have not noticed, then no, you should not be able to be sued, not even close. But if the business is fully aware that someone has it, um, then yeah. So I think that's a very clear differentiation. And I don't know. I believe that if you get traced back to someone who's asymptomatic right now, I believe that the business still could be sued. I'm not a legal expert, but given that, I mean, if that was the case, I don't think so many businesses would be afraid of closing, because it's very easy to. I mean, it's relatively easy to um, require people to disclose that kind of stuff and to notice it. If someone has clear and obvious symptoms, there's the temperature reading too. There's all that kind of stuff. Like if a business takes reasonable precautions, not over the top, they're running a, they're going to treat people like they're like it's a concentration camp. As long as they take reasonable precautions, they clean things, they keep things clean, but they don't need to clean things once every 10 minutes like a lot of people are suggesting. They don't expect people to wear masks 24/7. Like if people take reasonable precautions, they should not be able to be sued. That doesn't make any sense whatsoever, because we need businesses to reopen. Anyway, and that's the other thing too, is that now that things are reopening, it is up to the members of the general public to go about their day-to-day lives at their own discretion. If you are afraid of catching it, then don't go out, or go out as little as you possibly can. Like, this forcing other people to adhere to your paranoia is so just bothers me so much. So this is from Stefan Molyneux. He says, because people did not listen to reason, the world is going to have to suffer until communism becomes as despised as Nazism. And it's very true. I mean, it's very true. I mean, communism did far more damage throughout history than far right or Nazism, even though it's not actually far right. It's National Socialism. Um, this is what we're going to have to do, because people are lied to nowadays by universities, by public schools, that they're infiltrated with communists. Um, Even in government. I mean, McCarthy was largely right, contrary to what people tend to believe nowadays. And again, it's going to have to happen, because communism did far more damage. It will continue to do far more damage until people, awaken to that. The reason why the world is in this mess to begin with is because of a communist country that completely screwed the entire thing up. This is why we're in such a mess. And until people realize that, we're going to have to continue to suffer. And the big problem is that people are blaming the current problems of society on things that aren't actually the problem. Again, we're blaming the suffering of the black community on racism, when in reality, the racism is only a very small percentage of the suffering. Very small percentage. We're blaming all this. We're blaming politicians and stuff like this. No, the reason that we're in. I mean, some politicians are clearly responsible, but the reason we're in this mess to begin with is communism, and the reason that we're still suffering is because of communism, this far left socialist ideologies. So again, it's a very good point. I just wanted to point it out. So, um, kind of the big news of the last day. I don't know how many days they've been doing this for, but I just seen it yesterday, and that's this is from Matt Wall. She says, I can't believe that Antifa is literally taking over parts of a major American city, setting up roadblocks, declaring themselves autonomous, and everyone's just like, hey, what are you going to do? Have we just given up on society completely at this point? No, again, what was it, a few weeks ago or a month ago, that we had those the gun owners, or the people that had the guns, actually peacefully protesting at the state capitol in Michigan, and people saying, oh, they're the worst people ever, they're domestic terrorists, even though they're committing no violence. They're literally, by definition, they're breaking no laws. They are peacefully assembling, and then a month later we have violent riots, killing people, beating people half to death, stealing, millions of dollars worth of inventory, um, taking over literal parts of cities, and the mainstream media is, yep, yeah, they're largely peaceful. Like, where are we at as a society? Like, seriously, people, where are we at as a society that this is going on and nobody cares? Like, and the problem too is that most people I talk to who are apolitical, they have the oh, it'll go away on its own attitude, and that's not the case. That's not the case. Like, this stuff was not going on 10, 20 years ago. Like, the political spectrum has moved radically to the left, and I mean radically to the left, especially when people that already were on the left are prone to be on the left, and people are just ignoring it. Like, again, ignoring problems does not make the problem go away. Ignoring problems only guarantees that the problem will get worse. And this is the problem as a society. We're ignoring the real problems. And I think it's very clear as well. And that because the mainstream media is ignoring it, I think it's very telling that it is a real problem. And the mainstream media constantly only worries about problems that are not actual problems, and the fact that the mainstream media is largely ignoring this area of it and pretending that racism is the real issue of the day, it just goes to show that it is clearly a real issue, because if it wasn't a real issue, the mainstream media would be talking about it. Now eventually they may be forced to talk about it, but until it happens, like, and this is the problem too, that people like Trump are really in a hard spot, because I mean, I don't think he's in as hard of a spot as what I mean. But what I mean is that if he sends the National Guard in to take things over, then he appears, oh, he's a dictator, all this kind of stuff. But if he doesn't, well, then guess what? People just take that as a excuse to, well, we can run wild. There's no more rules. So that's the problem. People need to realize that He's in a very hard spot, so you can't blame him so much. Like, you can't blame him now. If I was him, he needs to crack down. He needs to crack down. I'm not big on government, the heavy-handed government tactics. I'm really not big on that. But the problem is that because we've ignored the problem for so long, the only way to crack down on the problem and the only way to fix the problem is to do that. So that's the problem. People say, "Oh, you're not someone who generally believes in stuff like that." Well, no. The problem is that if we were running things prior to that, the problem wouldn't have got so bad in the first place. So that is the problem. Now, again, too, Trump needs to take a more of a heavy hand at this, and he needs to go through with denying these areas that allow these crazy Antifa and Black Lives Matter people to run wild. He needs to deny them any discretional funding, any funding that he has the power to grant or deny. He needs to deny. It is a very simple solution. So anyway, this is from Zuby Music. Now again, this guy is very, very good. Um, Again, very, very good, very knowledgeable guy, and the way he puts things is very good. And he tweeted out yesterday, we have officially reached the stage where pretending to be a good person is more important than actually being a good person. Now, that's about as good as I can possibly sum up our modern times, in that you have all these people on social media that spend all day virtue signaling with their Black Square and Blackout Tuesday and, oh, why Black Lives Matter, I'm not racist, and all this kind of garbage. And what those people are telling you, by definition, no, it may not be conscious. I mean, I think for most of them it's somewhat conscious, that they care more about appearing to be a good person than actually being a good person. Now, that begs the question, why is that so appealing to people? Well, it's very simple in that how you appear to other people is more important than how you actually are. I mean, look at Trump too. Like, the fact, I mean, you look at how the left constantly pretends he's a racist and a sexist. They don't care that he actually clearly isn't either of those things. I mean, he clearly isn't. He clearly isn't. I mean, he was getting, awards from like the Jesse Jacksons of the world in the 90s and 2000s for that kind of stuff. I mean, I don't think he's. I mean, he's a bit of a womanizer, but I think pretty much any man in his position would be like that too. Like, if you're a man and you're pretending you wouldn't be like that if you were that rich, I mean, you're kind of lying to yourself. Um, and that's the other thing too, is that, I mean, Justin Trudeau wore blackface multiple times. No one accuses him of being a racist. And what Trump has done is far from blackface. Like, if it came out that Trump wore blackface multiple times, people would completely ignore all of the arguments they make that he's a racist, and they would exclusively focus on that as their main reason for him being a racist. So that just goes to show that, again, how you appear is more important than how you actually are. And people don't seem to understand that for whatever reason. And one of the main reasons that people are doing this kind of stuff is that if you're white, it's the usual, oh, please don't call me a racist. I'll say whatever I have to say if you don't want to call me a racist. That's the problem, is that I see some of these people on social media, people that aren't even in the political area, and they're there's this guy, he's more of a fitness guy. He's got a YouTube channel, all this kind of stuff, and he's literally talking more now about this stupid BS social justice garbage than he does about actual fitness stuff. Like, and again, it's just clearly just begging, please don't call me a racist. I'll say whatever I have to say if you don't want to call me a racist. I just want to fit in. All this garbage. So, again, this Subi Music guy, even though he isn't really formally into, a political guy, he is clearly one of the most awake people I've seen in a while, like how he puts some of these things. So, definitely check him out if you haven't already. And yeah, this is from Thomas Sowell. Now, again, Thomas Sowell has to be one of the best when it comes to discussing race relations and stuff within the black community and all that kind of stuff. And he has this quote, and he says, "Do racists care whether someone black is married or unmarried? If not, then why do married blacks escape poverty so much more than other blacks? If racism is the main reason for black poverty." Now, again, it is a logical fallacy, a clear contradiction that if you are a racist, you will be equally racist against someone whether or not they're married or unmarried, whether or not they graduated from high school or not. Because then if you're selectively racist, then you're kind of not racist by definition, right? Because if you're racist, you're racist against everybody. That's pretty much the definition of being racist. Um, and that's the problem too, that these people don't want to acknowledge. And until they acknowledge that, as long as many others, won't take them seriously, because the reason for all the pain and suffering that goes on in the black community is largely not due to racism. It is largely not due to racism. It is mostly to do with, again, that doesn't mean that people always say, oh, you think there's no racism? No, I think there's some racism, but I think that the clear majority, a clear and utter majority of the reason for the suffering of the black community is due to kids growing up in single parent households, kids not graduating from high school, um, ending up in jail, not getting a job, all this kind of stuff. And the problem is that because of the government, because of policies the government implemented, this is why things are so bad. The reason why single motherhood exists mostly is because the government literally pays women to have kids with unmarried men, for the simple reason that you get more money if you don't have a man in the house as compared to if you have a man in the house, especially a married man. Same thing in Canada. I mean, I've literally heard people talk about this kind of stuff, and people pretend like it's made up. No, I've literally heard single moms talk about how they can get the most money from the government. So people pretending that's not the case are absolutely insane. And it's for the simple, like I said, the simple thing is that if you were a single mom who qualifies for all the welfare programs, you have two, three kids, you literally need to be get a job making like 25, $30 an hour to make it worth it to come off welfare. And the problem being is that most of these people, I mean, a lot of them probably haven't even graduated high school. The vast majority, I mean, probably an incredibly small percentage of the people have a, you know, set, past high school education, which means that it's almost impossible to get a job like that, which means people are going to stay on welfare forever. And the problem with that is that personality and that kind of stuff is largely genetic. So you grow up as a kid and you say, hey, my mom, she spent her whole life on welfare, you know, and the boys say, oh well, my dad, he didn't stick around. That's how he was, successful. And again, your genes only care about the easiest way to reproduce. What is the easiest way to reproduce? And you see as a man that, oh, it's not important to stick around with the girl you have kids with. And same thing with the girl. They say, oh, it's not important to pick a good guy to have kids with. And that's the problem, is that the bad genes are increasingly being spread. Now, again, I don't support eugenics or any of that kind of stuff, but um, welfare is in basic form a eugenics program, because you're paying the last people in society that we want to have kids, and you're paying them a pretty good money too. It's not just a little bit; it is pretty good money if you qualify for all the welfare programs. So that is the problem. That is the main reason. If welfare was ended, I think that would be one of the best things for it would do more for the black community. It would be the modern day equivalent to ending slavery. Now, again, not that they're one and of the same, but the amount of suffering that would be relieved in the long run from ending the welfare state would be similar to ending slavery, because blacks would then rediscover the value of staying married, of getting and keeping a job. I mean, the other thing to point out too that I've pointed out is that people continuously argue that racism is the problem, that the main reason for all the suffering nowadays, and that's objectively not true. For the simple reason that if you look at the black divorce rate, the black single parenthood rate, going back, in the 1920s, 30s, 40s, it was much lower than it was right now. And there's no way that you can possibly argue that there is more racism nowadays than there was back then, for the simple reason that there were laws on the books back then that literally were by definition racist. Segregation, Jim Crow, stuff like that. Um, Nowadays, there is no laws on the book that are objectively racist. In fact, there is some, but they benefit blacks. All the racist laws in the books nowadays benefit blacks because they're laws, their quota laws that you need to get into college at a certain percentage. They need to have a certain percentage of this job, that job. So all of the laws benefit them nowadays. So the problem that the problem that is facing the black community nowadays is largely not due to racism. And until people want to have that conversation, I'm not going to take them seriously, because for the simple reason that your solution to the problem is just going to make the problem worse, which you're going to turn around and blame on racism. That is what is going to happen. I mark my words. I guarantee it has happened over and over again over the last generation. We've seen it. We just continually blame the same things over and over again and expect a different result. That's not going to happen. That's not going to happen. So the last thing I wanted to talk about here is, again, this is from Clay Travis. Now, he is a more right leaning, but this poll is clearly very telling of what the general public actually thinks. In that he puts out a poll and he says, based on the virus situation right now, would you attend a college or NFL game if the season started today? Now, 83.8% of people said yes. Now, this had 55,000 votes, so this wasn't no 100, 200 vote poll. Now, 55,000 votes is a very telling poll. And the fact that almost 84% of people said yes just goes to show that the vast majority of people do not believe the hype anymore. And the people that are still pro lockdown are in a bubble. You are in a bubble if you still believe in the lockdowns. So anyway, that's the last thing I wanted to point out here. So um, anyway, if you like the video, make sure to like and subscribe. Check out my PayPal and email. I got linked in the description. Again, appreciate any donations, but at the very least, just hit that like and subscribe if you haven't already. And last couple things, as always, check me out on Twitter if you haven't already. Check me out on BitChute as well. All the links are in the descriptions. You can find them all there.